So in this tutorial, we're going to have a look at creating an FM synthesis percussion loop. This is going to show off one of the other strengths of FM, which is in creating clangy, metallic, dissonant tones. And I'm just going to let you hear the loop to start with here. So I do have a beat to go along with it here, and I'll just let you hear the two of them together. So, really cool sound, and let's have a look at making it. So, to create our FM percussion loop, I'm going to use Synth Squad, so I'm just going to pull in an instance of Fuser here. Fuser is the overall host for the synths in Synth Squad, and I'm just going to dial up Cypher, and Cypher is that monster audio rate modulation synth that exists within the Synth Squad environment. So, we'll just have a quick listen to our initialization patch here. So, single oscillator, just coming from oscillator 1 here, passing through the filter to the output. There's a few things I'm going to do right away so that I can get a sound that's going to be better for us to start off with here. I'm going to get rid of oscillator 1, bring up oscillator 2. So oscillator 2 actually has the ability to take an FM signal. I'm going to pull the release all the way in, get rid of the sustain. I'm going to switch the filter over to a high pass. Let's go for high pass 4. I'm going to roll the cutoff down a little bit. So that's a better starting point for us here. The next thing I'm going to do, and this is something that's really useful to do whenever you're doing any kind of synth percussion, is I'm going to add a little bit of white noise to the signal. And I'm going to do that using envelope 1 as a modulation source here, and I'm going to apply it to the volume of oscillator 1. I'm going to switch oscillator 1 over to white noise, and I'm going to move its oscillator source knob over to white noise. This knob allows for the blending of various different oscillator sources, and all the way to the right is noise. So now when we trigger a note, we're going to get a very short blast of white noise right at the start. So that automatically makes it sound a little bit more like a hi-hat or something along those lines. It generally just adds a little bit of percussive sibilant front end to the triggered sound. So we're going to switch that oscillator off for now, because in the meantime we're going to want to work with oscillator 2 and be able to hear what we're doing. But we're going to turn that back on in a little bit because we've got a signal coming from it that we want to keep. So I'm going to start adding a little bit of FM in. And as you remember from before, when we switch over to the harmonic scale, we have the ability to tune this oscillator, oscillator 3, in a similar fashion to how the oscillators or the operators in Ableton's operator are tunable. So we can move up and down the harmonic scale. I'm going to switch it back into equal mode here, which allows us to tune in semitones. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you hear what a sweep sounds like when we're not working with the harmonic scale. We're just working with a random set of values. So you can hear as we go lower, it has almost an LFO feel. And as we go higher, it adds that brightness and that metallic top end that we normally get from FM. But there's a dissonant quality to it, and that's because we're not actually on the harmonic scale anymore. And that's something that we can definitely exploit to our advantage here. So one of the things I'm going to do right away is I'm going to add a little bit of modulation going to the tuning of my third oscillator here, coming from envelope 2. So this envelope over here, and mod envelope 2, now controls the tuning of oscillator 3, which means that we're going to get a very quick dropping in oscillator 3's frequency, which will give us a little bit more of a kind of clangy front end. And I'm going to tighten that up a little bit. And now I'm going to play with the waveform in oscillator 2 to see if we can get some more harmonic content here. Okay, I like how that sounds. And I'm going to try playing with the waveform in oscillator 3 as well. Okay, that's sounding good. So one thing that I'm going to do now is I'm going to adjust the filter routing a little bit and where our oscillators are actually going. So I'm just going to turn oscillator 1 back on here, and let's have a listen again. So we've got that little blast of white noise at the start. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take oscillator 2 here and patch it over to filter 2. Now our filters are running in series, and I don't want to do that. I want to actually have them run in parallel here. I'm going to turn on filter 2 and switch it into a high pass mode as well. And what that's going to allow us to do is add a little bit of wave shaping with this wave shaper here to the output of oscillator 2 as it goes through filter 2 without it affecting the white noise that's going through filter 1. So let's have a listen to that. And I'm just going to bring the drive up a little bit. And I'm going to change the shape. We'll go for op amp again. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take envelope 1, which is controlling our little white noise burst, and I'm going to add a little bit of it to the amp stage here just so that we get a little bit of extra distortion on the out. Now within Live, my MIDI clip is just triggering a single 1-bar sustained note. So right now, it just sounds like this. Now within Fuser, if I go over and hit up the animator section, and then switch this first instance of animator over to advanced, it's going to then take that 1 bar and just trigger a repeating set of 16th notes, as we can see here by the step duration, going to synth 1. So it's just going to re-trigger that note over and over and over on a 16th note grid. I'm just going to quickly switch up the latch and hold here. Okay, so that's pretty nasty sounding, pretty dissonant. One of the things I'm going to do right now is I'm going to pull the decay in so we've got a much shorter actual percussion sound. And that's starting to sound a little bit like a hi-hat there. Let's have a listen to that with the beat that I've got going. And I'm going to go back into Fuser, and right out the gate here, just going to add a little bit of swing to animator because that's just going to give us a little bit more of a humanized feel there. So let's hear how that sounds. Okay, so now we can start actually playing around with some of the settings within Animator's mod sequencer. I'm just going to minimize all of the mod settings here. That way they're outputting 0 as a value. So I'm going to go in, and under my mod slots up here, I'm going to select Step Sequencer 1's output, and now I'm going to assign it to a few things. I'm going to assign it to the pitch of oscillator 3. I'm going to assign it to the filter cutoff a little bit, and I'm going to assign it to the wave shape a little bit of oscillator 2. So now, when we adjust the actual mod values within this step sequencer, we're going to hear very, very different effects as all of those things with which we've applied the step sequencer's output to are going to be shifted by the step sequencer's values. So I'm going to start this playing, and we're just going to add a couple values in here and play around with it. I'm going to pull in envelope 1's decay a little bit, just so we get a little bit less of that white noise, and I might actually reduce it down in the mix a little. Okay, I'm liking that. And the next thing I'm going to do is go back, and under Animator Engine 2, I'm going to reduce it down to 4 steps. I'm going to 0 all of the mod values, and then I'm just going to increase the value of step 3. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to use it to apply a sort of shuffly offbeat pattern to the decay time of the amp envelope. So I'm just going to go and I'm going to select Step Sequencer 2's output. I'm going to change the via setting, which is a scalable setting, to 1, which is just going to be the same as all of the other ones. And I'm going to apply the output of step sequencer 2 to the amp envelope's decay. So let's have a listen again. Okay, that sounds cool. Add a couple more little adjustments in the step values here. Let's hear how that sounds. And I'm going to go back to engine 1 here, and I'm going to add something called mod glide. And that's just going to stop these from being hard static steps, and it's going to sweep them up and down. I'm going to do that on a couple steps, and we'll see how that sounds. Okay, so as the step sequencer is bouncing oscillator 3 up and down its scale, we're getting very different FM interactions between it and oscillator 2. We're also getting different FM interactions based on envelope 2's output, which is controlling the pitch of oscillator 3. So there's a fair amount going on that's actually adjusting the way in which oscillator 2 and oscillator 3 are interacting. And we can obviously play around with that a little bit more. I'm going to add a couple other little quick things that will give us some variation here. I'm going to take LFO1, which is going to be this LFO over here under our mono mod section. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to apply it to the actual amount of FM that we're getting from oscillator 3 going to oscillator 2. So let's have a listen to that. And I'm going to take another LFO and go for LFO2, which is going to be this LFO over here in our mono mod section again. And I'm going to apply it to the scale amount of oscillator 2. So that's going to adjust oscillator 2's tuning a little bit. So let's have a listen to that. Okay, that's sounding really cool. That's a nice metallic, quirky, kind of glitchy percussion sequence there. And we can also probably reduce the decay time a little bit more just to pull it out of the mix a little. Excellent. And let's go back and we'll have a listen to that and the beat together. Okay, that sounded great. So there's a couple other things I'm going to do here within Synth Squad. I'm going to add an instance of the phaser, and I'm going to add an instance of the tin can verb. And the tin can verb I really like because it gives the same sort of feel as very, very short delays. It kind of just makes the sound slightly more exciting. And I'm just going to start with a couple arbitrary settings there. We're going to adjust those in a sec. And I'm going to take the output of step sequencer 1 here, and I'm going to apply it to the wet dry amount on this phaser. I'm going to apply a little bit of depth and a little bit of resonance, and let's hear how that sounds. And step sequencer 2 here, I'm going to apply to the size amount of the tin can verb, and I'm going to take the output of LFO1 and apply it to the wet dry on the tin can verb. So we're going to get a lot of modulation here. All right, I'm quite liking how that sounds. So now we're going to start processing this. We're going to start off by using a simple delay. And again, we're just going to be using that to adjust the stereo field a little bit. So I'm going to start with 1 and 1.5, which are my general settings for something like this. Let's have a listen to that again. So right before this simple delay, I'm just going to add an instance of the frequency shifter, and we're actually going to be using it in ring mod mode. I'm going to add a little bit of drive. We'll start with, say, 6 dB. And I'm going to drop its frequency a fair amount. We're going to start with 100 hertz. And I'm going to go for about a 50% wet dry. I'm going to switch the LFO rate over to synced, put it to a rate of 1, and I'm going to choose upward sawtooth as my LFO. Add a little bit. Let's just hear how that sounds. And we'll listen without. So it's doing a good job of bringing out some of the low-end grit there. I'm actually going to pull it down in the mix a little bit more, so I don't think we need quite as much of it, but let's listen again. Okay. Next up, I'm going to add a compressor to the output of the simple delay, and I'm just going to be using this in RMS mode. I'm going to be using it to tame some of the transient front end here. So after the compressor, I'm going to put in an instance of Ableton's AutoPan, and I'm just going to be using it in quarter note beat synced mode here with a bit of an amount and the phase reduced, and this is just going to be our typical sidechain emulation here. So it's going to give the impression of a quarter note kick coming in, ducking this signal out of the way a little bit. And I'm just going to turn on the metronome and bring the volume down a little bit, and that's going to make it a little bit easier for us to actually hear what we're doing with the offset here. So. Turn the metronome back off, and I'm going to bring this back up in the mix. And let's have a listen to the percussion with the beat here. So I'm just going to solo it again, and we're going to do one more quick thing here. This is something that's really fun when you've done this kind of modulation with FM within a synth like this, because it's all very much based on short envelope times. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop back in, and I'm going to configure Fuser's output to actually take the decay of the amp envelope here as a parameter that's automatable here. So I'm just going to go in my arrange view. I'm going to take the amp envelope setting here, and I'm going to automate it at a couple different spots just so that it extends. And that's going to give us a really bizarre tone as the amp envelope allows for a longer FM interaction here. So I'm just going to have a quick listen to this 8-bar loop of that percussion loop by itself with the amp envelope extending at the end of bar 4 and bar 8. So my final step here, now that I've got the sound the way I want it, is going to be to play with the stereo field just a little bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take LFO 4 here, which is this LFO here, and I'm going to apply it to the pan output of Cypher. So now every time LFO 4 repeats, it's going to adjust the actual stereo placement of the output of Cypher. Because our sequence is based on 16th notes, I'm going to put it to 16th note, and then I'm going to change the wave shape to a sample and hold wave. So as you can see by LFO4's output here, every 16th note we're getting a very different random output from LFO4, and that's going to adjust where the actual sound coming from Cypher lands in the left-right placement. So let's have a listen to that. And we'll have a listen to that with the beat again. So FM synthesis is really good at producing percussion loops like this. It's excellent for making clangy bell-like tones, and other types of synthesis really don't excel at this type of thing to the degree that FM does. So it's a really good choice if you want to create these kind of bizarre shaker / hi-hat style loops that can evolve into even more ear-catching sounds. As you can hear with this type of loop, as you adjust the decay time or as you play with the modulators, the way that their interaction shifts the actual sound massively, and so you can have it evolve with your tune. So something that's in the background like this can actually become a much more dominant sound in your mix, and it's a really, really cool use of FM.